Recently, I've been engaging with a local farmer who's worried about the loss of curlew and lapwing ground nesting birds, and forestry gets blamed as encroaching on the open spaces needed for the waders, and I know there's predator impact as well, foxes, badgers, crows, and the rest of the corby population. And I'm aware that there's a habitat management programme with farmers in the Clyde Valley that's working really well with improving bird numbers. So I guess what work is being done or should be done to look at the conservation aspects for those types of birds as well?
So you ask me that.
I know, I'm looking directly at you.
Because I'm a birder.
You just said you're a birder.
It's probably appropriate because rather than everybody feel the need to chip in, we just have people who've got a specific point. So Graham would like to come in with his hobby, and Sarah.
Yeah, no, so I'm smiling when you mention this one. So there's been a lot of research. Yeah, basically wader populations across the Northern Hemisphere in decline. This is a wider picture of decline. A lot of research, particularly in Curlew, the British Trust for Ornithology have done a lot of research. It's quite complex, as usual, as to why they're declining. Predator impacts are certainly one of them. So I know there's still a lot of research. There's a lot of understanding to come. It's not clear-cut. So it's one of these things that, because I know more about it, it's not I think we'd like to have a nice simple answer. I would too. It's not like that. It's much more complex and a lot more to understand of why certain species are in decline. And it's never one thing. Yeah. It's a whole combination of factors that are causing decline. And I've got to say, curlew is one of my favourite birds, so I recognise that. And it's back to scale. I think that landscape scale comment I made as well. If you're looking at, say, waders, it's got to be a sufficient scale, and that's where working between neighbours to look at having areas that are a sufficient scale and good habitat is really, really important. So it's the whole, what's our cultural system, what's the predator control situation, what's the whole landscape, but recognising there is some big pressures probably in some of these species that are beyond, like climate change impacts that are beyond that. So.
Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, just briefly, I mean, when you're talking about protected species or individual species, there can be a tension between protecting a species that's maybe protected by a SSSI, for example, and that wider ecosystem recovery that has much, much wider and much longer term biodiversity benefit as well. I don't have the answer to this or the solution to that. And I know of a couple of kind of live examples, and I know Nature Scott are doing some work on that as well. So I would just say it's maybe not always as black and white as a one species approach. I think we're all starting to think about it in the wider ecosystem recovery kind of frame of mind, if you like.
Okay, thank you. Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a very live tension, and it's I mean, despite the declining numbers, wading birds are very widespread and a range of sort of habitats across Scotland. So it's a major consideration when anybody's looking to plant trees, and the process would involve establishing that quite early, whether that's through speaking to Nature Scott or RSPB or just our sort of, there's a biodiversity database of where these birds are and where the hotspots and where are schemes in the vicinity of that. We would expect somebody to get empirical data to go and do observations and get that, and then we'll work with Nature Scott if it's a designated site, or RSPB if it's a sort of wider area, and have to take those tough judgments. And we in some places the wider considerations may be that some impacts on curlew, if it's a small population and there's other available territories, it might be that acceptable. But in other areas where that's a sort of a key population, it will limit woodland creation and the opportunities for woodland creation. That's one of these uncertainties that can crop up. But there is work, so there is existing guidance and an existing approach, but the Working for Wading partnerships and Nature Scott are currently, and we're inputting to that, currently looking at whether there's some new guidance and a sort of wider approach, a revised approach might be appropriate, and that's currently actively being looked at.
Thank you. Ruth.
Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, as others have said, there is this sort of tension, and there is some evidence that predators coming out from forestry will have an impact sort of up to about 1 kilometre away on open ground breeding birds. But as Graham says, that might not be the only factor driving their population decline. And this is where we do need to think about joining up our policies and linking through to our agri-environment farming supports and what's going on in our farmland. Because some of these birds have been pushed out of some of the other habitats that they would have nested in terms of perhaps some of their other farmland habitats. So again, a call for joining up across policies.